You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. U.S. Army General James Wilkinson once described the Comanche as the most powerful nation of savages on this continent. Their strength became evident as the United States and Mexico sparred over who owned Texas and what is now the southwestern United States. The Comanche saw themselves as the rightful owners of a huge swath of land, running from the Arkansas River in Colorado to near the Rio Grande in Texas, a region they called Comancheria. In the early 1800s, around 20,000 Comanche lived there, alongside 2,000 Kiowa and 300 Plains Apache, sometimes sharing hunting rights with other tribes like the Wichita. The Comanche first caught the Spanish' attention in 1706 in New Mexico. A series of conflicts led to a punitive expedition by Juan Bautista de Anza in 1779, during which the Comanche leader Greenhorn was killed in eastern Colorado. The Spanish managed to make peace with the Comanche through treaties in 1785 and 1786, welcoming them as allies against the Apache, exchanging goods and gifts. However, when Mexico won its independence from Spain in 1821, this relationship started to unravel due to Mexico's inability to continue paying tribute and its own domestic issues. During the 1820s and 1830s, the Comanche faced significant threats from rival tribes like the Osage and the relocated eastern tribes, including the Shawnee and Delaware. These new rivals were better armed, pushing the Comanche into conflicts. The arrival of Anglo-Americans, the depletion of buffalo herds by hunters, and pressure from northern tribes like the Cheyenne and Arapaho only added to the Comanche's challenges. Their numbers dwindled due to disease, pushing them toward peace with Mexico to focus on these external threats. Despite past support, Mexico denied military help to the Comanche, straining their relationship. A surge in demand for horses and mules by Anglo-Americans led to increased Comanche raids on Mexican ranches. For Comanche men, raiding was a risky but lucrative way to gain wealth and status, allowing them to acquire wives, either by purchase or among the captives. Mexico accused the United States and Texas of fueling these raids by trading guns for horses. In 1826, Mexico called on the United States to stop supplying weapons to the Comanche. By 1835, Chihuahua, suffering from raids, offered bounties for the scalps of hostile Indians, aiming to curb attacks. However, these measures had little success in stopping the Comanche, illustrating the complex dynamics and challenges of this period. In the 1830s, the Comanche tribe managed their challenges cleverly, especially through smart diplomacy. They had a good trading relationship with New Mexico, a Mexican province to their west, seeing it more as a helpful partner than a threat. This was evident when the governor of New Mexico at the time, Manuel Armijo, chose not to support a military campaign against the Comanches in 1841, stating it would lead to the complete ruin of New Mexico. Even when New Mexican officials were aware of a Comanche raid on Chihuahua in 1844, they didn't intervene. Securing peace on their western side allowed the Comanches to focus on dealing with threats from the north and east. They struck a peace deal in 1835 with U.S. soldiers and eastern Native American tribes, which allowed these groups to hunt on Comanche lands, but also let the Comanches and their allies continue their raids on Mexico. Following this, they made another peace agreement in 1840 with the Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho from the north, acknowledging them as significant rivals by allowing them to live and hunt on Comanche territory, and even gifting them horses. Meanwhile, to the south and southeast, the Comanches faced the expanding Anglo-American settlements in Texas. Initially, most of their raids targeted the Hispanic communities in Texas, but after Texas won its independence from Mexico in 1836, the Comanches had to reckon with the new Republic of Texas. Texas's first president, Sam Houston, supported a more peaceful approach towards the Comanches. However, ongoing raids led to the election of Mirabeau B. Lamar in 1838, who took a harder stance. A significant turning point was the 1840 massacre of 35 Comanche chiefs during a peace meeting in San Antonio, sparking violent reprisals. Despite this, financial strains from military campaigns eventually pushed Texas towards a more conciliatory stance, leading to an 1844 agreement acknowledging Comanche lands. The peace agreements with the United States, Texas, and surrounding tribes provided the Comanches a breather, which they used to focus on raiding Mexican provinces south of the Rio Grande. Mexico was a lucrative target for raids because of its rich horse populations and the inability of Mexico to retaliate effectively, especially since any military action would require crossing into hostile Texas territory. The motivation for such raids was partly economic, as the Comanches established profitable trade relationships with the Americans and New Mexicans, trading captives and livestock and needing guns and goods. Trading centers like Taos in New Mexico and Bent's Fort in Colorado were crucial, where the Comanches traded horses and mules for a good profit, amidst a backdrop of decreasing bison populations that sometimes forced them to consume their horses during tough times. Before 1840, Comanche raids into Mexico typically didn't go far beyond the Rio Grande and weren't especially deadly, often resulting in just a few deaths and the theft of some livestock. Yet, the threat from the Comanche was taken very seriously. For instance, back in 1826 in northern Nuevo León, the governor had to order that no one should go out into the countryside from the villages unless they were in groups of at least 30 armed men. By the 1840s, the situation escalated dramatically. Starting in September 1840 and continuing until March 1841, the Comanche launched some of their largest raids. During this time, 6 armies of Comanche warriors, each numbering between 200 and 800, invaded northern Mexico. The most extensive raid reached regions as deep as San Luis Potosi and Zacatecas, which is about 400 miles south of their usual crossing points. From these 6 raids alone, 472 Mexicans were reported killed, and more than 100 were taken captive. The raids left many people homeless, stripped of their livelihoods, and their livestock either stolen or killed. The Comanche amassed so much wealth from these raids that their frequency slightly decreased for the following 3 years, only to intensify again from 1844 to 1848 even after making peace with Texas. Mexico struggled to respond to these raids. The Comanche were safe from retaliation in their territory north of the Rio Grande in Texas, and the Mexican government, caught in political turmoil, offered little help. The defense against the raids mainly came from poorly armed militia, organized by state and local governments or large ranchers, and hired scalp hunters, who were often Anglo-Americans or other indigenous people. In 1847, Durango even introduced a bounty system, offering 50 pesos for the head of a hostile Indian, which was increased to 200 pesos by 1849, a significant sum at the time. Between 1831 and 1848, at least 44 large-scale raids were launched by the Comanche into Mexico, resulting in 2,649 deaths and 852 captives, with 580 being redeemed. The livestock losses were enormous, likely exceeding 100,000. If the Comanche couldn't steal the livestock, they killed it. These raids weren't without cost to the Comanche either. They often engaged in direct conflict, resulting in 702 Comanche deaths and 32 prisoners. The year between July 1845 and June 1846 was particularly bloody, with 652 Mexicans and 48 Comanche killed. The Comanche transformed northern Mexico into a landscape from which they extracted resources with little opposition. Contrary to how some U.S. historians might depict them, the Comanche were far from a simple or disorganized group. They managed to build an empire of the plains through sophisticated diplomacy and highly organized raiding strategies. Their bands united in the summer to plan raids, attracting participants from as far as the Arkansas River in Colorado. These alliances included not just Comanche but also Kiowa, Apache, and sometimes even Mexicans and Anglos. In the autumn, groups of Comanche would meet at Big Spring and travel along well-known trails by the light of the full moon, hence the term Comanche moon used by Texans. They crossed the Rio Grande and gathered in the Bolson de Mapimi, a desert region offering good grazing, water, and mild winter weather. Here many Comanche warriors brought their families to spend the winter, venturing out in all directions to raid as far south as Jalisco and Querétaro, armed and ready for battle, with women and children also prepared to defend if needed. The desire to recover the bodies of fallen warriors was a notable vulnerability, often leading to additional Comanche casualties. After their raids, the Comanche would return to Texas with their captured livestock and humans, who were integrated into their society as laborers, wives, or even warriors, despite often facing brutal conditions. Despite the harsh realities of captivity and integration, many of these captives and adopted members became culturally Comanche, marking a complex social integration despite their initial status. For decades after gaining independence in 1821, Mexico struggled with internal chaos, leaving the northern regions largely unsupported by the central government. The traditional military forts, known as presidios, were in decline, and defense largely fell to local militias. However, these militias were not well equipped, especially when compared to the Comanche, who had superior firearms obtained through exchange with American traders for stolen Mexican livestock. In Nuevo León, efforts to fight the Comanche included assembling militia forces, with a significant force of 2,000 cavalrymen in 1852, although these efforts largely failed to significantly counter Comanche raids. In addition, diseases like smallpox and cholera not only devastated the Comanche, but also heavily impacted the Mexican defenders. By 1848, the Mexican government began to take serious action against these raids by allocating more funds and stationing additional soldiers in the northern states. To strengthen their defenses, Mexico offered land to groups like the Seminole and Kickapoo tribes, as well as African Americans who had escaped slavery, in exchange for their assistance in fighting the Comanche. In 1850, over 700 individuals from these communities agreed to settle in Coahuila and aid in defense efforts. The Kickapoo even conducted raids into Texas to steal livestock, using Mexico as a place of refuge, mirroring how the Comanche used Texas to avoid Mexican retaliation. Other indigenous groups also played roles in Mexico's defense strategies against the Comanche, including the Tlaxcalans, a group historically allied with the Spanish since the defeat of the Aztecs, as well as the Alazapas, Tarascans, and Otomis. These collaborations highlighted a diverse and multifaceted approach to frontier defense in the face of ongoing Comanche raids. Back in 1841, a seasoned Mexican soldier who had battled the Comanche shared with Fanny Calderón de la Barca his strong belief that Mexicans might one day see the Comanche roaming the streets of Mexico City itself. Come 1846, the Chihuahua legislature was openly acknowledging how the Comanche and Apache dictated their lives. They said, "We are pretty much at their mercy, traveling roads they allow, farming land they have left us, and using whatever they have spared, always aware they might decide to take that too." In a bold move in 1847, about 200 Comanches strolled through Durango City and left without facing any opposition. Within the same year, traveler Josiah Gregg observed that the region stretching from New Mexico to the edges of Durango was nearly deserted. Most of the haciendas and ranches were abandoned, with the population largely taking refuge in towns and cities. The entry of American troops into northern Mexico in 1846 and 1847 revealed a desolate area and a people crushed in spirit, offering minimal resistance to the invasion. It seemed some northern Mexicans held out hope that the United States might fare better against the so-called barbarians than their own forces had. The conclusion of the Mexican-American War in 1848 saw Mexico ceding a large swath of territory to the U.S., presenting the Comanche with new adversities. Even after the Mexican-American War ended in 1848, the Comanche raids into Mexico didn't stop, though the situation changed with the United States taking control of areas that would become California, Arizona, and New Mexico. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which concluded the war, brought Mexico a significant promise from the United States. The United States agreed to patrol the border to prevent further Native American raids into Mexico, ban trade in items stolen from Mexicans during these raids, and return captives. Despite spending a lot of money, the United States found it just as challenging to reduce Comanche and Apache raids as Mexico had. In fact, the raids intensified in the 1850s, with one of the most extensive reaching Jalisco, Mexico, a journey stretching about 600 miles from their usual crossing at the Rio Grande near Presidio, Texas, and nearly 1,000 miles from their home in the Great Plains. In 1853, both countries agreed to stop the United States from having to counter these raids. By 1856, Durango reported nearly 6,000 deaths, 748 abductions, and 358 abandoned settlements due to mostly Comanche raids over 2 decades. The late 1840s marked the height of Comanche power, but their decline was swift. In 1849, a cholera epidemic killed thousands of Comanches and their allies. The 1850s brought a drought and market hunting that drastically reduced buffalo herds, essential to the Comanche way of life. With their large horse herds also straining resources, the Comanche began consuming horses for sustenance. Texas's population exploded to 600,000 by 1860, encroaching on Comanche lands. The United States Army established garrisons within Comancheria, limiting their movement and territory. By the end of the 1850s, the Comanche population had halved from its pre-1849 numbers. The American Civil War saw the Comanche regaining some territory, but their last raid into Mexico was likely in 1870. Post-Civil War, overwhelmed and reduced to about 1,500 individuals, the Comanche, along with their allies the Kiowa and Kiowa Apache, surrendered to the United States Army in 1875, marking the end of an era. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.